Hey guys, welcome to chapter 2. You would not believe the things I've gone through. I've recorded this for 4 times and it didn't came out so properly. So I use using my laptop, but I'm back on my desktop now, so when you get down to it. Okay, did you miss me? Because I missed you, she said when the guard escorted her inside the bedroom. Out of habit, he stood when a lady entered, and she flashed him a brilliant smile. A gentleman warrior who cleans up very well. She fanned herself with her hand. I think I'm in love. He didn't answer, and she didn't seem to mind as she casually scanned the room. Retro Dracula. Not necessarily what I would have done, but then, I'm not married to some proof shutters like you might be. She shrugged and headed for the bathroom. Taking a shower if you don't mind, she said airily over her shoulder, making him raise his eyebrows. At the doorway, she unbuttoned her tight blouse and shrugged from it, leaving only a transparent blank bra. She turned to him, revealing her scantily covered breasts. He knew, just so he could see the creamy flesh spilling from the lace when she bent over to remove her boots. What he didn't know was why. Was she truly mad? Most people who were mad didn't think they were. But she seemed to be proud of it. He was usually quick to determine people's motives. Yes, she wanted her freedom, but for some reason, he knew she wasn't ready to sleep with him to receive it. If he had to guess, he would say that she simply didn't see stripping in front of him and making herself completely at home in a stranger's bedroom as odd. In fact, he suspected she didn't see them as strangers at all. As he stood, concealing his surprise, she untied the fastening of her silky skirt at her hip, and it too fell to the ground. A fine gold chain around her tiny waist caught his attention. It was unusual, the design apparently very old, but it glinted anew when she moved. Once he could take his eyes from it, he found her only in that whiskey bra and scanty black underwear. So intricate, he was shocked anew. They were like a work of art, or like a ribbon decorating one. She gave him a teasing smile. Vampire-like? She purred, clasping the front of her bra to toss it with her other clothes. He scowled, because he did like, very much. He ran a hand over his mouth, wondering if her high plumped breasts could be any more beautiful. She had coral pink nipples that he could spend hours tonguing, and alabaster flesh he wanted to cup and palm. He began to speak, then had to cough in his fist before he could continue. You strip in front of a vampire when you don't even know his name? She gasped with mock horror and covered her breasts with her hands. You're right. So what is your name? My answer will be as forthcoming as yours. What do you want it to be? She smiled at that, but then replied with a question. Some kind of name that fits a battle-scarred, overgrown vampire warlord? Battle-scarred? Overgrown? He wondered why in hell he would care what she saw of him. She was divinely wrought, but mad. He would take his scars with his scanty. Nikolai Roth, he grated. For the briefest second, he saw recognition flicker, but then she eyed him archly and breathed. Oh, you're good. Roth, the old word for rage. That's a bingo idea for a name. Her hands dropped. I'll just call you by that, she said, then gave him a second look. shaking her head with a rueful smile as if she couldn't believe he was so clever as a hatter. She leaned back against the doorway, raising her bent arms above her head to grasp her elbows, displaying her mouth-watering breasts and flashing a flirtatious smile that would have dropped most men to their knees. She asked in her whiskey voice, "Care to join me, Roth?" She winked when she said this, his name, and rolled her hips off the doorframe. No. He bit out the word with difficulty. He didn't want her to know how his body didn't respond to her. His mind did. Vague memories of being a human did. But not his body. He was the walking dead. No respiration, no heartbeat, no sexual need or ability. Not until he found his predestined bride and she blooded him fully. With this blooding, something inside him, some essence maybe, even his soul, would recognize her as his. He would see her as the only one that was meant to spend an eternity with. The woman he could love without measure, if one believed in that, and his body would wake for her. In the past, he'd yearned for his bride because of the power she would bring him. He would finally be as strong as blooded vampires, his senses as acute as theirs. But he'd never missed the sex before this, and Roth knew, after this display, that she was not, definitely not his. For this would have blooded any vampire. She shrugged, a simple movement in sight to behold. He turned the corner of the bathroom. When she emerged 15 minutes later, clad in towel, she crossed to the closet. He was almost certain she had used his toothbrush, which charmed him for some strange reason. The towel dropped, leaving with only her chain and him with a view of her perfect ass. She swallowed. He swallowed, pardon. Have you no modesty? Never in his life had he encountered a female so quick to be so naked. But of course, he never in his life encountered a female who should utterly be naked at any chance. Not at my age, she said, as she began exploring his recently unpacked clothing. How strange to hear her say that when she looked so young. He found his head tilting to keep his gaze on her as she moved and bent. The chain swayed at her waist, and her long, damp hair cascaded down her breasts. He stifled a groan at the particularly fruitful glance. A true redhead, he closed his eyes as he couldn't have her. How old are you? He grated, opening his eyes. Physiologically, I'm 25. Chronologically, I'm not. So you're immortal. An amused smile played upon her lips. I am. She pulled on one of his shirts, though it fell far off one shoulder and well down her legs. Why did you stop aging at 25? When I was strongest, not for the same reason you were frozen. She trailed off, and him. 34? 35. And why do you think I stopped aging then? She ignored him, continued digging. After a few moments, she plucked out an old bejeweled cross from his bag. She pinched the relic, holding it away from her, keeping her gaze from it. You're Catholic? Yes, it was a gift from my father. To keep him alive in wartime. Roth shook his head at the irony of just how well it had worked. I thought I was the one who should be repelled by it. She scoffed. Ugh, only a turned human would say that. Besides, I'm in no way repelled. With jewels like that, if I look at it, I'll want it. So you don't want it because you're Catholic, I take it? My family was Orthodox pagan. Can I have it? She held it forward, still not looking at it. Can I? Can I, Roth? Put it back, he said, fighting the unfamiliar urge to grin. With a pouty expression, she returned it, mumbling something about tight-fisted vampires, then dipped her feet into his boots. When she turned to him with her hands on her hips, his lips almost curled in a slight smile for her, a mad pagan immortal swallowed by his boots. What does your mother feed you? She teased. Renaissance anabolics? His urge to smile faded. My mother died young. So did mine, he thought her murmur, the first time. Besides, I was born after the Renaissance. She drew her feet from his boots and sauntered past him. But not by much. That's true. And why do you think I stopped aging at 35? He asked again. She frowned as if she didn't know where his question came from, then said, Because Naughty Christoph found you dying on a battlefield, decided you'd make a fine recruit, then made you drink his blood. Bit of a wrist open perhaps? Then with his vampire hoodoo blood inside your veins, he let you die. Unless he was in a hurry, then he would have killed himself. 1 or 3 nights later, and voila! You're raised from the dead. Most likely with a frown on your face thinking, Holy shit, it worked! He ignored the last bit and asked, How do you know the blood ritual? He thought that only vampires knew the true way to turn a human. In movies and in books, the change always came as a consequence of a vampire's bite, when in fact, a human had more chance of turning into a vampire if he bit the vampire. Like I said, I know everything. Yes, but he was learning, if spardonically, she was an immortal, who'd been frozen physiologically at 25. If she was pagan, she was at least a few hundred years old. She knew of the blood ritual and that Christoph recruited his soldiers straight from the battlefield. When she scooped up her clothes, opening his door, she snapped her fingers for a guard down the hall. Roth merely watched like a bystander. Psst! Minion! I need these laundered. Very little starch. Oh, don't just stand there gawking. You'll anger my good frenemy, General Roth. We're like this. He couldn't see her, but he knew she was twinning 2 fingers together. Once she'd foisted her laundry, she closed the door by dramatically leaning back against it, as if to say he couldn't get away from her now, then glided over him. As a rule, he observed, he calculated, and he waited. But he'd never quite enjoyed sitting back and watching events unfurl as much as with her. Unpredictable didn't begin to describe her. She clutched his shoulders and straddled him. Nothing between them but his pants and a few inches. She could even feel her heart as she knelt over him. She was definitely not his bride, or he would have ripped through his zipper to get inside her. His heart would have beat. He would take his first breath in 300 years, and in the space of one of those breaths, he would be buried deep inside her thighs, wrenching down on her. But nothing happened approaching that. Now, Roth, we need to work some logics out. When I'm kept as a pet, my needs are very involved. His brows drew together. I have no wish to keep you as a pet. You hold me prisoner. You think to order me. How does that differ? You're not a pet, he insisted. He couldn't think. Her eyes were mesmerizing. Her sex was inches away from his, and her pleasing accent was lulling. She leaned in by his ear and murmured, What if I wanted to be your pet? Would you like that, vampire? Her fingers brushed their way over his chest, unbuttoning his shirt. She picked up his hands one at a time and set them on the armrest, giving them a slight squeeze as if to let him know she wanted them to stay that way. With raised eyebrows, he let her. He wasn't about to move and couldn't imagine what she would do next. If I was your pet, you could keep me for your pleasure, and I would serve you in every way you desire. She pulled his shirt open, clearly admiring his chest. Hard. Her voice was breathy. Scars. She moistened her lips. I'd endeavor to blood you so you could wake at sunset with my mouth greedily on you while you clutched my thigh and drink from it. You would go to sleep at sunrise still deep inside my body. Her hand was trailing down, her eyes dropped till they fall in the jagged scar that had been his death blow. I am here for the taking, and ache for your touch. She reached down and cupped beneath her before he could grip her wrist. In an instant, her seductive look vanished, though she showed no surprise that he wasn't hard. She felt around his coat, then arched an eyebrow to say, Well, my word, rough. If you were hard, I wouldn't know whether to be tantalized or terrified. Then with buried speed, she was off him, and in his bed, laying on her stomach, chin propped up in her hands. She was utterly unaffected by what had just occurred, while he was angered and ashamed. As she had felt him like this, he wanted to show her hard. How do you plan to keep me here during the day? An unblooded forebearer shouldn't be so hard to vanquish. Vanquish? By her? Amusing. I'll send you back to your cell. You want to be my pet? I'll take you out and put you back in your cage at my pleasure. She blinked at him. You don't want to send me back? Who will entertain you? I can do poker. And make shadow animals. He shook himself. This was just another instance of the Lord playing with them. She was not normal. He knew that. Anything he learned about females was inapplicable with this one. If she could be unaffected, he could pretend to be unaffected too. I need you to answer some questions. I need to know what you are and what your name is. I'll answer your questions if you answer mine. Done, he said quickly. Ask. Were you afraid when Kristoff stood over you? I was tired. Strange question. Most mortals would have been terrified to see the Grave Walker. Is that what they called Kristoff? Kristoff would have found that amusing. At her nod, he said, Well, I'd seen a lot by that time. What's his agenda? Does he want to replace the Mitstru? Roth hesitated, then answered honestly, hoping that she would do the same. He wants his crown back, but he doesn't want to rule over any fraction but her own. Uh-huh. She raised an eyebrow, as if she didn't believe him, then asked, That was your brother in the dungeon, was it not? Murdoch? Yes. Turned vampires don't usually have family in the Horde. Murdoch died in the same battle. I have 2 other brothers turned later as well. You're young, yet you're a general. How did you swing that? He was over 300 years old, young, perhaps in comparison to her. I refused the dark gift if certain conditions weren't met. Her eyes grew bright with new interest, and as she patted the bed for him to come and sit beside her, he felt he was on the verge of learning something, so he complied, resting against the headboard to face her, stretching out his legs. He almost laughed, the first time he'd been in bed with a woman in centuries, and she was easily the most beautiful of any before. He could do nothing with her. He couldn't even drink her, though his fangs ached to pierce the fresh, pale column of her neck. Thank God he'd fed before she'd been brought up. Roth, you counted with Christoph as you lay dying? When she put it like that, it sounded more reckless than it had been, as Roth had lain in his own cooling blood, nearly freed of constant struggle and ongoing war, famine, and plague. He told Christoph, "You need me more than I need to live." Christoph had seen him in many battles and agreed. "I did counter. I was used to giving orders and would take them from no one but a powerful king. I wanted my brother turned if he was dying, and trusted compatriots as well. Christoph, he had complied." That wasn't all. Roth had asked for 60 years, so he and Murdoch could watch over the rest of their living family. Their father, 4 sisters, and 2 other brothers. They'd needed only 3 months. "You know, I've heard of you when you were a human. Weren't you called the Warlord?" This surprised him. "Unkinder tongues. How could you have heard of me? Your accent isn't from Northlands." She sighed. "Not anymore. I've heard of you because I'm interested in all things martial. You were quite a vicious leader." He felt his expression grow cold. "We were defending. I was anything I needed to be to see it done." He could tell by her reaction that she liked his answer. Her lips parted as she tilted her head at him. Then she slided closer to him on the bed as if she couldn't help herself. Her voice grew more gentle. She said, "But in the end, you lost." He stared past her. "Everything." The battle had only been like the final blow of a dying man. Prior to that, the enemy had scorched and salted their lands. Famine followed, and there'd been no defeating when plague erupted. "Roth," she said softly. He turned to gaze her. Her eyes were so captivating in elven-like face, so clear and lucid at this particular moment. "Let's make a pact, you and I." She eased open his legs to kneel between them. "Let's vow that we won't harm the other in this room." She pressed him back until he lay fully on the rolled pillow. What would she do next? When he gave her one quick nod, she flashed him a warm smile that made him feel praised in some way. Her damp hair was spilling down over his legs, and with one back over her hand, he swung it to one side, baring her tantalizing neck. A rush of innate scent of her hair swept him up, almost like a drug, sweet and subtle, just like her flesh. If she smelled like this, he couldn't imagine what she would taste like. He wished she'd bared her flesh in offer to him. "Roth, this is embarrassing," she murmured in a sensual voice. "But I think I've caught you staring at my neck." "You did," he admitted. oddly feeling no shame to be complicated. Of his orders, most reveled crime. She brushed her fingertips over her skin. Are you tempted to take a drink from me? In the worst way. He wondered how many times Ivo had taken her, and felt a spike of some unfamiliar feeling claw in his gut. We don't drink from the living beings. It's how we get our name. It was the Order's pledge, their pact. Roth had never tasted flesh as he drank, but then he never felt the smallest stir of temptation, not until her. Why? So we are never tempted to kill, he answered, giving her an official line, which was true, but the whole truth was way more complicated, and they kept the details they'd managed to learn a secret. Living blood not separated from its source, brought side effects with it. A vampire would suffer torments from it, such as his victims' memories. Christoph believed these memories were what drove natural-born vampires insane and made their eyes turn prematurely red. As far as they could determine, the only way not to harvest them was to not drink blood as the person died, avoiding the evils and the benefits. What if you drank from an immortal? That couldn't kill us, she asked, her words lulling again. He couldn't seem to take his eyes from her. A tricky question. To answer without saying that the immortal would have far too many plagued memories, multiply numbered comparison to an mortal. He answered her question with one of his own. Do you want me to make you a flesh creature? The mere idea of this made his words rough, his fangs arch. At her titillated look, he feared she'd say yes, calling his bluff. What would he do then? Rain check, she answered brightly. Then to his shock, she curled up between his legs, nuzzling her face against his uncovered torso, and wrapping her pale delicate arms and hands through his thigh. I never ask my questions, he said, staring at the ceiling, trying to sound casual about what was occurring. He'd seen a great many things in his life, but his female was throwing him. We have all the time in the world for that, do we not? We're immortal after all. He thought she'd kiss the scar on his lower stomach with her lips, and a slow little lick. He lay tense, rasping. At least tell me your name, creature. Mist, she whispered, then fell asleep. Mist. How fitting that she was named after something intangible and capricious. Long after, he was still roiling. In sleep, this little pagan clutched his leg with her pink claws, and they were claws, sharp and curling, though somehow elegant. He ignored the pain, for it was little in compared to the old satisfaction of thinking that she clutched him for comfort. He savored simply, resting with her, doing nothing but watching her hair dry into big glossy red curls that spread out over his chest. For centuries, their army had been constantly on the move, hiding in the shadows of the Northlands, in often grueling conditions, keeping their growing numbers a secret. Everything had been about the war, all adding up to this attack, to furthering their cause. He brought a curl up to his face, brushed it over his lips. So soft, like her flawless skin. Tomorrow night, If she hadn't given him the information, and he somehow knew she wouldn't voluntarily, how could he lash his skin? How could he lash her skin to get her secrets? After Mist had cleaved to him so trustingly, could he break any of her delicate bones and have her gaze at him with pain in those green eyes? If she'd been his bride, he wouldn't have to hurt her, would be forbidden from even harming her. His life given over to protecting her. He ran the back of his fingers down her silken chest, feeling her light, quick breaths warm on his stomach. He'd never truly felt the sting of the enemy in his life, but had never envied other men except those who enjoyed peace in their land. He'd been born affluent, his family aristocratic, and fortune had followed him until his later years of his mortality. To envy was to lack. Why did he want to destroy any vampire who might have blooded her? So, as you can see, Roth is falling deeply in love with Mist. And I'm sorry for putting my hands down. Come here. My little kitty is disturbing. He kept crawling all over my feet and into my lap, crying at me while I was reading. Say hello. No? Yeah, so everybody, this is Toby. Alright, time to go. Alright, so tomorrow you see chapter 3. Hope you enjoyed my reading today, and wish you all happy IAD. Take care.